Not sure anything else.
You, Mr. Mayor. With our new sign bylaw that just was passed last week, on September 6th, we did approach that somewhat specific topic that we do not permit the place a sign. They're in my glasses. A sign cannot be oh, wow. Erect, prohibited, erect, place, or permit place of the sign determined by the bylaw enforcement officer. Be placed for a vexatious reason in a vexatious or obtrusive manner. While that certainly could be considered somewhat obtrusive in the eyes of whomever. However, there is a lot of media out there throughout all of Canada. Our closest person or municipality, the city of Port Colborne, placed an order, and they found out of that because of the CCAF, the Canadian Constitution Foundation that CCA was talking about earlier. They revoked their orders because of the constitutional battle that we battled for years. We were hoping that we could make possibly use this, and we still could if council wishes to bylaw pursue that. We will make a one use of Canada, but we certainly can try. But my recommendation is not proceed with that because of the charter rights. But we have received, as Councilor Green mentioned, numerous complaints, at least well over a dozen in the last two and a half years. Mr. Carter, any other comments?
So what we're here to do is discuss it. So I wonder, is there, could we approach the individuals, especially the ones located so close to schools and daycares and such, and request that they, just remove the signs or the flags, and for the reasons that you just listed, right, in the bylaw there? I don't know. I'm just wondering what the appetite of others are. I know that I didn't know we were at over a dozen, but I know that I've had a lot of people approach me, and people are really offended by them, and I didn't know if we should get involved or could.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is really obnoxious. It's no more obnoxious than thousands of T-shirts worn by our own residents all through the town. As a journalist of 40 years, I think that free speech is way more important than a couple of people being offended by this, as offensive as it is. Free speech is when you allow other people to say things that you don't like. Free speech is when you hate what you're saying, but you have to defend their right to say it. And it has to be pointed out that this obnoxious saying, which is on flags and pickup trucks and bumper stickers, actually started about 20 years ago about Prime Minister Harper. And the people who were flying these were so offended by that now they're throwing it back in the faces of the people who said the same thing about Prime Minister Harper. So there weren't any complaints then from the people who are complaining now, and there shouldn't be any complaints now about the people returning the favor. Yeah, it's obnoxious. But think again on the T-shirts. It's way worse than this on T-shirts on 14-year-olds walking into schools. So for us to tell adult taxpayers that they're not allowed to utter a political opinion which they feel that they're fully entitled to, and legally they are, constitutionally they are, I think would get us into a terrible mess, and I wouldn't support it. I mean, again, it's obnoxious. But these comments being said about prime ministers have been obnoxious for 20 years. We've got to let it go.
Yeah, I think there's a community standards issue that most of us share. But again, there's a free speech component to this. I don't think there's anything wrong with members of the town, with members of council saying we really don't agree with this sort of thing being, put forward in front of our kids, in front of our schools, in front of parks, and those kinds of areas. And to make a statement that we find it offensive, but we can't make a rule against it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with coming up and saying, we don't believe this fits our community standards. I don't know how to do that. I'm just saying that I'm happy to stand up and say, I disagree with doing this in a public setting where kids are exposed to it. We had a sign that went up, a billboard that went up on our property at the Bush Patrol area when the trail was first put in. And this council found that sign offensive because it insinuated a certain word in the name that was on there. And we had that removed. We could because we own the property. That was something we could say, this doesn't meet our community standards. We've done this in the past. And I don't think there's any reason we can't take a stand on that. Now, I don't know that means we put out a news bulletin and we take here's our media of, but we're against this sign. I'm not saying that. But I don't know how we do it, but I think it's individuals and people know where we stand. You shouldn't feel bad about saying, I think this is inappropriate in this location. As much as we tried to fight, we didn't want cannabis stores in certain areas. We don't want certain different kinds of stores in certain areas. These sayings and flags and signs are not appropriate around areas that our children spend time. So I want to say that just to say that, in my opinion, that's a community standard for us. I don't know that we can go out and officially do that, but I think anybody should feel the ability to make those statements in public and support our kids in that area.
Thank you, CEO Speed. I think this is a really, it's a hard time to discuss something like this because I think it is, we'll say, politically charged, right? I think that for council to jump into a yay or a nay, if we put out a media release right now, we have half the town going, yay, that's great, and half the town going, no, that is, so I don't know if that's something we want to do right now. I think we could deal with it on individual basis. If I had a resident in my ward saying, I don't like this, I have an open door policy and I have a lot of guts, so I walk over and say, hey, this is offending the neighborhood, can we look at something else? But I understand, I like free speech as well. I have comments on my truck, like ethics and Essex that could offend people. So I also am really worried about sending staff out in gray areas where there's not a solid bylaw to back it up, which is just a conversation we had at council a couple weeks ago. If we're sending out our bylaw team, we better have something that backs them up, or I think we're putting ourselves in precarious positions, which I don't want to do to our staff. So I don't know if there's anything, we're hearing the concerns, we're discussing the concerns. We want the community standards, like the deputy mayor said. I just don't know, usually the light bulb goes off in your head and you're like, oh, we can do this. The light bulb is not quite there yet. So I'm not sure there's anything we could do tonight and maybe in this term of council.
Through Chair, we have probably not much we can do about it, but going back to what Mr. Carter has said, it was written in our sign bylaw that our bylaw team could go there and ask them to remove it. Person doesn't have to, but we could at least go there and ask. And I don't think we've done that yet, and perhaps I heard the wrong thing, but we have that other agreement that we did write it in there enough to at least approach them and say, as per our sign bylaw, it's not allowed. You should challenge it.
Yeah, I believe what we're talking about is more specific to the AP Trudeau bill. This is the bylaw, we have it in there to be more of a vexatious, obtrusive, being when we have neighbors that don't get along, believe it or not, and they'll place signs on the opposite side of their fence to be very obtrusive to the neighbor. That is clearly demonstrated. They're not expressing the freedoms of their choice. They're intently trying to irritate the neighbor. That's what this is in. Not necessarily the topic of the anti-Trudeau law.
It's further that then, so we have a noise bylaw freedom of speech allows you to speak, but would our noise bylaw supersede how loud you can speak it? If I'm on a property yelling whatever I want to yell in my freedom of speech, do our neighbors, our bylaw enforcement have the right to tell them to do it at a lower level? If we can, perhaps there's another angle we can approach it, where we can turn the sign down somehow, we can turn all of them out, where we can find a happy medium. Everybody can be solved today, but I'm guessing if somebody's yelling on their front lawn and exercising their freedom and right to do that, you do have the right still to tell them to do it at a level that meets our bylaw.
Through the chair, I believe we have the right to address the volume of the freedom. But we can't tell you, you can't say that, and we can certainly tell you to don't do that. That would be recognized in the courts. Obviously, the higher the government form, federal being charter, we have permission than us. We can still regulate our bylaw in terms of values, of what that person says, you certainly don't have. You don't have that.
The Mayor Malatch next, and Council Vanderbilt on the end. Just so council is aware, the OPP, there's one by Essex Public. I think that's where it's been. I've attended that home and asked them a few times. So that step has happened. That's just a council is aware. Mayor Malatch.
So I just heard over here, and I think this council here is saying, so, Mr. Carter, that we control whether you say it loud or whether you say it quieter. And I believe that we all say that they should be allowed to express their freedom of speech, which I agree with as well. But the level of vulgarity which they do, I'm wondering if we can control that. And I think that's what Councilor Darren is going to do. We had, like someone mentioned, a certain company that was advertising on a side and said that we're not going to allow that because of vulgarity. Perhaps this is the same level of instruction that we give you. You're allowed to say that, that you agree with some of this politics, but you cannot be vulgarity in expression.
Through chair, I believe that's determined by the freedom of speech. I don't believe that's at our level from the school government level. But I don't recommend that we challenge that. But in terms of volume of the saying that would certainly be correct. But in terms of what is called and what is not, it's specific to this day should apply. I believe we would be silent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I forgot to mention, I think Mr. Carter gave us a really good warning when he spoke earlier, when he said that the media will be all over this. If we took any kind of step to control this, we would be making a classic small town mistake. I saw this early at the beginning of my career when I was a reporter at the Sioux Star, Sault Ste. Marie, and somebody presented some sort of boilerplate motion that, well, we should declare French as a second language of Sault Ste. Marie because it was founded by Francophone settlers and blah, blah, blah. And the city council of Sault Ste. Marie said no, because, Sault Ste. Marie, the second language is Italian, the third language is Finnish, 50,000, the fourth language is Ojibwa. Like French is way down the list. So they said, no, French is not the official second language of Sault Ste. Marie. The media went nuts. The media pilloried Sault Ste. Marie for probably 20 years. This happened in about 1983, just after I moved here from the Sioux. And Sault Ste. Marie's reputation did not recover for decades. And if we insert ourselves into this partisan political fight, we could have the same thing happen to us. Because there are probably 5 or 6 or 8 million people in Canada who agree with those flags, as offensive as they are, and they were called to start hating Essex. So we should stay out of this. It's just a bad idea to try and control this.
That was an excellent conversation, so we're looking forward to these meetings. I think if you look at your administration, we have some strong administration and always get creative. May not be a solution in the future, but from the discussion, I think it's going to spur more discussion on our end too. Next topic was extending the pier at the Colchester Harbor, and that was brought forward by Councilor Vanderpump.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is sort of a blue sky thing, positive, let's dream about what we could do that's fun and interesting. And I've mentioned it before in these chambers a couple of times, but you walk out of the Colchester Pier, and it's kind of a disappointment. That's all there is. It ends here. Every time I walk on it, I think, I just wish it was another couple of 100 feet longer. And we've had staff tell us, oh no, federal fisheries, federal waters will never agree to it because it will interfere with the laminar flow of Lake Erie along the lake shore, and it causes eddies and pollution and this kind of thing. Yes, all of that is probably true, but we can also do it on metal piers. I happened to be on the Lake St. Clair the other night in a boat, and there were all kinds of brand new boat slips that are in Lake St. Clair, which is also controlled by federal authorities. And they're allowed to put metal posts in the water about 20 feet. And we could do that with an extension on the pier, I think, with metal posts. I'd like to see it go out a couple of 100 feet. People can fish on it, people can walk on it, people can sit on benches. I think it would be a fun tourist attraction. Yeah, the feds might not like it, but I think if we decide we want it and we start to push for it now, this could be a 20-year project to get Ottawa to agree with anything. But I think we should try to do this. I think it would be a positive improvement to the harbor and to people's and tourists' enjoyment of the harbor. Don't forget, the current government's getting a little long in the tooth, and things change in Ottawa, and regimes change, and attitudes in those departments can change. But if we decided we wanted to do this, we should talk about it, maybe make a decision and just start applying, and just chip away at it for 20 years. I think it would be just a fun, positive thing. It would cost money, of course, but that's why we speak long term.
Any other questions or comments? Councilor Long?
Thank you. Through UCAO Suite, this seems like almost a strategic planning or a budgetary discussion in the next term of council. Like, sure, we can talk about it, but it's really a big idea. It sounds like, yeah, let's just extend the Colchester Harbor, because I like that idea too. But I don't know if that can really take further steps tonight, considering that we're almost done this term of council. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I just want to put my vote in favor. I think it's a great thing to start talking about, and I agree with Councilor Bondi. It's not something that flesh out, or you have to start talking with sometime. That's what these media are about. If there's a little bit of appetite to come, I think that's all right. It goes on the list, and then we start talking about it. It's going to take putting money away for 10 years and finding funding and match with other levels of government. But it is. It's so many of the towns that you go to, they're on lakes. A lot of places down south have fishing piers. The fishing pier develops its own fall, and it brings its own people in. And we're pushing Colchester as a tourist destination. It's just one more thing to bring people to. And if we're doing it just with piers, you're not building out or you're doing it on a post, you're not building a pier, a solid base. It really doesn't affect the lake bottom as much as you would the other way, and it doesn't stop sand from moving, it doesn't stop those processes anymore, and it's all there. So I think it's a great idea. I think it would just be another boon to tourists, and but the big deal is just funding ideas. That's 100%. But if it's worth doing, it's worth starting now, because whatever you start, it's still going to be 10 years for getting started. So I think it's a good idea, something that should go on the list of future plans, and find a way to look forward. Thank you, Councilor Long.
Just a couple of points we had. It's been many years we've been working with the federal government, so sometimes for and sometimes against, but trying to develop that harbor for a bigger potential for us, because Colchester now is a destination and will become more so as the development kicks in. And I think the federal government sort of kind of leave things sitting unless somebody's jabbing them all the time to do something. So this is another way to start jabbing them and you know, getting more interested in what we have and or at least pay us some lip service of some sort, and who knows what we can get out of it. So we have to keep working, and as you mentioned, the governments come and go, but the folks in Colchester stay the same. So again, it's a good idea.
Go to Director Morrison. You President said as well.
To you, Mr. Chair, yeah, we can certainly look into that idea if it's the appetite of council, which it seems to be. The only concern that I would see at this point would be that our property boundaries actually extend like 15 to 20 feet past the existing pier. So being federal waters, there could be a chance that they would just immediately just say no. I know even the permitting process that we go through right now, as mentioned earlier this summer, with dredging and seaweed removal, it's a very intricate, in-depth process that is a very extended time period. So we would have to go through that permitting process and look at all that. But if it's council's outfit, I can certainly start beginning that research. And in terms of working with the federal government, we are always working with them on a regular basis, trying to get additional funding for the harbor. It seems like we're relatively capped around the $40,000 per year for infrastructure upgrades, which usually goes towards dredging or seaweed removal or small upgrades or things like that. So, but I can certainly work with them, reach out to our contacts, see what sort of process would be involved and if permission would be granted at all.
Any other comments? Okay, we will move on to our next topic, which was standalone washing units and parks brought forward by Councilor Maybe. It will ask that you kind of clarify to former chair if it was permanent structures versus porta johns.
Thank you, to you, Chair. One of the things that I saw at AMO were these fully automatic washrooms. And that they are portable. They're not porta johns, but they are built to be portable, and that they can pick them up and deliver them. I thought it was really neat. They were self-cleaning, they were sterile, they looked pretty good. They had lots of design features built in for anti-vandalism, anti-graffiti. There was lights. There was options on getting them solar powered, so they didn't have to be hooked up to electric grid. But I kind of thought that they might be price prohibitive, that they wouldn't be. So our last meeting, we approved what was number $173,440 in overages for a washroom and for a public facility that we had to leave the washroom out of and get back to it later. So I asked around for a couple prices, and for a single washroom, a single automatic, one toilet washroom, installed, Craig brought in and put on a pad, was $190,000. So then I looked at the washrooms we were planning on putting in the park that were paying $343,000 for. That same two-person automatic washroom was $290,000. So you have actually got it for cheaper than the one that we put in. So they're not price prohibitive. So I think it's warrant to look at them and see if this is something that we could put in and use them in areas that we normally can't get, washrooms built into. Maybe in the back of Sadler's Pond, maybe out on the Colchester, Bells Park or something like that. Just different areas where we like to have washrooms, like to keep people around. And then maybe even in open spots on our streetscapes and stuff. They're not a bad looking unit, and we could probably find ways to keep them inside of our downtown cores and keep people downtown shopping. So that's why I brought it forward to have a discussion about it.
I'll turn it to going first, but just on that, just for clarification, with the Heritage Park washrooms, which are $350, a little addition, it's not just washrooms, it's also a large storage unit for that too. So there's some extra square footage there, just for clarification. So, Councilor Vanderbilt?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just, to be short, I agree with Councilor Meany. I looked at these same units at AMO 3 years ago, and I wondered exactly the same things that he brought up. I'm sure I could think of a whole bunch of reasons why they wouldn't work, but maybe we should try one. Oh, thanks. Oh, I'm interested to hear how staff use these.
Have you used them or heard their thoughts? Councilor Bowman?
Just, and in several more conferences, I've seen them, and I think the last time we did some investigation on operation of them, that's what it cost really on that end, so compared to permanent structures, it's higher, but things change, so it's always going to take another one.
Director Morrison?
Through Mr. Chair, so there's a few points I just want to touch on. The first being with community parks versus neighborhood parks. So most of our community parks right now, which are higher end parks in terms of amenities, they have what we're working towards is to have the washroom facilities, permanent facilities on site. So an example of that would be Colchester Park, the Essex Center Sports Complex, the fairgrounds in Harrow, and the Heritage Park washrooms. So when we're looking at those features and amenities, we're trying to get those areas where we're going to see congregation of more people than just your smaller neighborhood parks. The neighborhood parks are, generally speaking, within 500 meters of walking distance. So the thought process is that it should be within walking distance if you had to leave the park and go back to your residence to go to the washroom. So that's why you don't see a lot of the smaller neighborhood parks with washroom facilities. In terms, like CEO Sweet said, the washrooms at Heritage, they are a little bit more expensive because we do have a couple things that we need to take into consideration. We're not just working on that area as let's just get washrooms there. We're also trying to keep curb appeal and aesthetics. We also have the storage portion of the facility as well grouped into that price. So, and there's also architectural costs associated with the design of the facility. So it is a little bit more expensive than those units for that purpose. I'm not overly familiar with those purposes, the units that you're speaking of. We did look at some units, they do still require some sort of plumbing or pump out situation. So if we do connect them, we still have to make sure that the services are there. We still would have to make sure that they're not vandalized, and there's still operating costs with that as well. So it's not entirely necessarily about the price. We're also taking into other factors like the curb appeal as well. So I think that's all.
Thank you. I think it's a great idea to look at some sort of portable washroom availability, because I think we will start having more events in different places. Our two of the parks are tremendous and picking up steam. Hopefully we will have more in Harrow and in the Gregory, those areas which start to grow. It would be great to use. I've seen the ones at festival and stuff where they're on a trailer. There's two sets of washrooms with 3 different units in the washroom. So if you have more people and you have something going on, instead of renting porta-johns, and I'll just say the ladies in my family are not fans of porta-johns, and it's good reason. And if you want something that's clean, something that's accessible, something that's usable, and I think if we had something like that, we could look into having our own trailer that could go to the different events that we have. Hooks up to a truck, you call it with you, take care of your pump out stations, cleaning, all of that. That might be an option for us. Now that we're going to have permanent washrooms at Heritage Gardens Park, we have permanent washrooms at the harbor. As we're using our different areas though, it would be very good, depending on the amount of people we're bringing in, to have a unit like that. So I would certainly be interested to see what the cost of going that route would be, because it's very affordable. I've seen the same ones that, Councilor May's talking about. And again, it's more of a job to pick them up, put them on a trailer, haul them, take them off, whereas the whole trailer is portable washers. It's much easier to use, much user friendly and easier to get. So I just think it's a good idea. It allows people to stay at events. It allows people, when you go out with your kids or internet, the minute somebody needs to wash them, very weekly, you find the car, they drive to the washroom, you know it's available. So it brings that on site. And with a lot of our natural areas and things, if we have different events that go on, it's something that can be used anyway. So I think it's important that we have those, and we control the cleanliness and usability of it.
Just to clarify, yeah, these ones, they are meant to, in the end, to be permanent. They're easy portable, they save on the design work, you don't use the engineering, of course, that's all that. You still do have to bring a service to them most of the time. They do have pump out models, but for nice ones, you want it to have a service brought to it. But yeah, I want to make sure that these are meant to be in place for everyone, so put them there. You can remove them, but they're really designed to stay in place. There are some really nice ones that are mounted on trucks, I think, or trailers. But these ones are outside, we're really permanent.
I like the idea of some temporary portable washers at some point in time to go to hospitals. I think, for instance, we've got open streets going up in here, very short here. It'd be nice to have some portable washers, so we could just say, okay, we've got washing service, we can use it for street. Then go through by the direction rather than go back to the buildings. Even with the Colchester Harbor Park, there's Jackson Park. You could have washers that both ends of the park. There are permanent ones there, but those are washers that really. Salvage Park, if we decide to have something in Salvage Park and then put off the system because they're included in Salvage Park, you could have some washers there. You wouldn't have to worry about getting portables to move around all the things. We have something on our own that we can use. And I think honestly, we could probably put it up if we would use it. It's an international time. Something like that. Yes.
Yeah, just quickly, yeah, so to Mary's point, so the one I'm looking at, the council meeting, so I think, place at Settlers Pond, if we had an appetite to have a permanent bathroom there, I think for these walls, this may be a cheaper solution than going out, tendering, design, build, etc. At these things, and making hundreds of them. So I see a place like Settlers Pond would be an opportunity to try something like that. Get a price on it from here.
Just to build on that a little bit more, I'm really glad that you did bring it forward, because just as Councillor Garrett said, perhaps in the future when we find ourselves that all of a sudden there's room in the budget to put a bathroom at Sadler's Pond or somewhere else, the idea of those, because I remember I toured with Councillor Bowman at AMO a few years ago. The idea is exactly what you just pointed out, Joe, that you are eliminating the tendering and the, the design and any kind of architectural input and stuff. They've got several units you can just, shop and order and then plunk them down, and they're designed for things like Sadler's Pond or elsewhere. Some year when we find extra money in the budget, I would like to look at those too. I remember a couple of years ago when I saw them, I thought, well, if there's ever a time and a place to plug those in, these would be a great option, So thanks for bringing it forward.
And Councilor Garrett and Councilor Beakley, not really what I'm about to propose. But there was years ago, Councilor Bowman, but that's its Fun Fest, they were looking at maybe in a permanent pavilion built, right? Because it costs every year for a tent. So maybe being a town event, maybe there is a business plan where if there's any year surplus or portion goes towards some type of portable truck unit that can be used at other events. So maybe if it's worthwhile as when there's surplus, because that is a true town event, right? You use some of that profit, and there is surplus years that can be used. I never thought streets, these open streets that are happening more and more, that's a great place to put those big venues. So I know it's thought of before, it's cost prohibitive. I know a few people, I know Councilor Meeting, that you mentioned, pretty reasonable. Director Jerusalem is like, oh. Councilor Huron.
So I was just gonna say, like, it's that stigma with the porta john, right? Especially, like, my wife will not use them. So, but she will use the ones, I remember the double trailer ones, mobile ones, Master Ernie's, just started with their stage, and they had them there, and they were clean, they're just something where male or female would want to go and do the business.
Yep, last word.
Sure, just, I would certainly not oppose that, but yes, we're getting off of what you brought forward, Councilor Mady, but I think that maybe in the future, if we look at something, another bathroom, we could look at those as well. But where Councilor Bjorkman brought us with the porta, like a nice one that we could use in a lot, we find all kinds of uses, multi-times a year, I'm sure. And it's absolutely entirely different than a porta john, because I've been to some outdoor weddings now, and those are very nice structures. You can even get 1 and 2 units on a trailer. And maybe with the new storage space we're gonna have over at Heritage Park bathrooms, we can start.
On that note. Moving on to the next topic was process/penalty if site plans are not followed, and that was brought forward by Councilor Bonnie.
Thank you, CAO Speech. I believe one of the site plans in our town that wasn't being followed is reversed and gone back to being followed. But I've also been asked, what happens, what are the checks and balances if a site plan, goes to administration, it gets approved, and then a year later, they're not following their site plan. Also, I've been asked about committee of adjustment applications. Families come forward, they apply for a severance, and then, based on the farm selling, and the farm doesn't sell. So what are the checks and balances to make sure that when site plans are approved or committee of adjustment applications are approved, that it's followed through?
Director Travis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have Rita Jabor online today. She's having some difficulties hearing us, so the louder the better. Rita, thumbs up if you can hear us.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, so for you, Mr. Chair, to Councilor Bonnie, so the first question pertaining to site plan control agreements. We do have some tools in place where conditions are not met that allow us to pull back certain securities. So for example, throughout the construction of a project, there are conditions under the agreement that must be met. Where we've learned since, let's go back a decade or so, we were not holding back enough. And so we've learned since whatever time it was that we need to take an increase in value in order to put the pressure on where there are things such as outstanding deficiencies when it comes to landscaping or maybe lighting deficiencies or such, where we need to ensure that we're holding back enough in those site plans, similar to what we do in development agreements with developers for those big subdivisions. We're now doing that with site plans. So in past years, we've held back an amount. It's not a very scary amount, but certainly that will not be returned until all conditions are met within an agreement. Where years have passed, we can always pull that agreement, and if there are some things that, let's say, we close off, the project's been around for 5-10 years or longer, and they are still bound by the agreement with the corporation, we can always go back to the property owner and say, hey, this is registered on title, and you still are bound by those conditions. We would then have a teamwork with our environmental enforcement and our chief building official, between development services, and especially the planning team. We would write a notice indicating that you're bound by these terms of the agreement. Maybe your signage has changed or something like that. Where there are deficiencies in relation to the zoning bylaw, for example, a recent example where there were obligations that were not met that not only didn't meet the conditions of the agreement, but also were opposing or not in compliance with their zoning bylaw, we then have the power under notices, order to comply, and potentially even for pre-orders and convictions if we need to get to that position. And so with that said, that's just a high-level summary to Mr. Board. If you want to add something else that I may have missed.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to add that we currently take 50% of the total value of the site works. So for a project that's quite large and significant and will likely have impacts on the town services and on neighboring properties, that security could be in the amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we know that proponents are going to comply in order to get that security back.
And so to follow through, if we could read out, so Councilor Bonnie, I think your question was related to community investment. Conditions, will call them conditions of severance. Is that what we're referring to? So Rita, under the Planning Act, if I'm not mistaken, applicants have up to 2 years to comply with those conditions before severance is registered. And there is a great process within the planning team to follow through with those conditions. Rita, if you can share with council what that process is.
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair. So once a consent application is approved by the Committee of Adjustment, it's approved provisionally, meaning there's going to be conditions that the proponent has to meet in order for the Planning Division to sign off on the certificate that a lawyer will then take to the registry office to officially register that lot as a new lot. So those conditions can include a reference plan, they can include a septic system report, and we keep track of whether or not they've satisfied those conditions. We won't let anyone receive a certificate until we have that full list checked off. So in the case of somebody applying for a severance, getting it granted, and perhaps changing their minds about whether or not they wanted to sever the property, they would simply let that lapse. And that consent approval would lapse, meaning the property would not be subdivided.
Any questions, comments from council?
Thanks, Rita. Moving on to the next one was pedestrian bridge over Highway 3. Now it's brought forward by Councilor Vanderbilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This idea is very similar to my last one about extending the Colchester Pier. This is my land and sea proposal. But you know, we live in a really flat place and we have very few features. And every time I drive up Highway 3 through Essex, which is a couple times a day, you see the greenway on each side, and I thought, you know, it would be great to have a bridge over this. You know, I often walk the Savile Greenway part. I wrote a lot about the Herb Parkway, and I really admired the bicycle trail that they built all the way around that, and I've ridden those bridges, and they're fantastic. It really makes it fun to be on a trail. So I think it would be terrific to have one over Highway 3. The trouble is money and the Ministry of Transportation. The MTO, oh man, we have to fight with them for 10 years, I bet. But like the pier thing, if we decide that this is something we like, then we should start talking about it, start discussing it, and this would be a 10-year plus kind of idea. I'm a member of the Essex Region Conservation Authority, and I discussed this with some of their officials, and they're very much in favor of it because they own the Greenway. They think that would be a great idea. It would be people coming out of Essex could you know, walk a loop and come back over the bridge. But they warned me that the MTO would be a huge problem. ERCA actually tried to build one of these bridges over Walker Road, and they were completely rebuffed by MTO. And the MTO warned them that the costs will all be on you. Costs will be entirely on the town. We're not helping, and they're going to argue about it. So, but all that aside, okay, it's hard. But I think it would be another fun thing to have. It would make, instead of having to go a kilometer and a half out of your way to take the Greenway through town, you can just go over the highway. I think it would be help with the identity of the town. I mean, a lot of the other communities around us don't really know how central we are, and what a central part of Essex County we are. I think that would kind of cement it. It would be maybe become an iconic, signature of the town. Anyway, again, it's just, it's a blue sky idea, just floating it out there, let's talk about it and see where it goes over 10 years. Thanks.
That's fine, that's really.
Yeah, let's go. I like it, I think it's a good idea, but I want a little bit of clarity too, because 4 years ago at AMO, when I sat in on a session with Minister Carolyn Mulrooney, and we spoke about the Victoria under the highway, after the expansion is done. And I remember appealing to her about the active living side, where there would be X amount of feet. I said, like, you have a ton of kids, and like, and we're supposed to be, I thought in the end, don't the final plans, and Mr. Gerard can let me know here if I'm way off track, didn't it end up that where we're crossing number 3 at Victoria, now we're gonna have like extended active living paths on both sides to easily access either side of the highway with bikes and trikes and active, like, isn't that where we landed with that? That crossover is gonna have active lanes on both sides?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, that's correct. So the design of the Highway 3 widening project does include the multi-use trail and the sidewalk underneath the underpass to connect with the existing trail on the other side.
Yeah, because it was originally like a sidewalk beside the road, and I believe you were in on that discussion, Councilor Vander Dolan, where Minister Mulrooney seemed to really hear us, and then the plan came back and it was expanded to this great path with a multi-use trail. Is that where, or are you looking at somewhere else putting it over the paths?
I think Councilor Vanderbilt, when you come out of Savage Park, instead of going over to Victoria, would be an overpass directly connecting to the.
Oh, from Victoria, instead of coming this and then, oh. So 2 paths, one under and one over. Wow.
Councilor Reed was where I was thinking, I know it's been a long time that we've been discussing this Highway 3, so I wasn't, that's where I thought we were going to have a path. And I'm all up for talking about a bridge after, but I think we need to see what it looks like and how accessible it is. And if the MTO wants to do a bridge or an under trail, I just hope it's accessible and has some curb cuts.
It's doubly accessible from my understanding, right?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I forgot one thing. This thing would have to be made out of, probably cold rolled steel shapes. Or if only there was someone in town who made steel tubes. Maybe you get a donation or some help or 20% off or something.
Thank you for your take. I like the idea too. It's a matter of money trying to squeeze it out of do something. One that they put up, the University of Windsor, Assumption High School, $5 million. So that took forever, and they had to, someone had to die to go for it. I think the chances of getting it are kind of slim, but we can ask for it.
You know, previously, once the Herbury Parkway was going through, they put 5 or 6 that are over. Previous director of infrastructure did require the cost at that time. They're around $250,300. So they've gone down from the $5 million, but I'm not sure the distance to crossing the highway or length of that. So that was that time. So it's a little cheaper. Any other?
While we're asking for the bridge, just ask for access on Wood Highway 2, be awesome.
Let's see that topic on.
Straightforward.
Before we move on, anything else from Director Morris or Director Gard, or good? Okay. Next topic then is the future location of Fire Station 3 and brought forward from Councilor Bond.
Thank you, CAO Sweet. I was recently at an event at the Harrow Soccer Complex. It was the women's race, and there was 130 or 103, I think, racers, and their goal is to do it every year and bring in, 200-300 racers. They're just going to grow it. And while I was there, I was thinking in my head, if there was a fire, like, I don't know how having an event at the Harrow Soccer Complex and having fire rescue show up could go together, because they were using the road. And I think the Harrow Soccer Complex has potential to grow as an event center. It's a great location, it has bathrooms, it has parking. And just, I know that we're waiting for a report, but in the meantime, I've been, a lot of people are talking in Harrow saying, can we check Queen Street, on the 3rd concession west, Queen Street on the 3rd concession east? Can we check south of Erie? And I even got somebody with boots on the ground saying, using Wellington Street at the high school area is not a bad location for the Harrow High School. And I said, well, if I'm going to lose any part of that Harrow High School, that's the part to lose potentially with another municipal use. So I'm hoping the report comes back with a lot of details. This is a very big decision, and no matter where we go, we're going to be criticized. I know that, but I'm hoping that it's heavily vetted. One of the comments I've also heard since we talked about the location of the fire station is if firefighters live in the south and they have to come up Erie Road, if you come up Erie Road and it's busy, turning left, we're at Smith's Funeral Home, is very difficult. You are in line a long time. So that's why Wellington Street, where the high school is, was brought up. But sometimes you cannot turn left during business hours. So you'd have to go all the way around town and figure that out. So I'm not sure when the report's coming back. I just wanted to throw out there other locations, and I just want to stress that it's a big decision. And that Harrow Soccer Complex could be used for concerts and other things. And I'm not saying it's not the best location, but we have trucking right there and event center. So I just wanted to bring those concerns forward, because I really feel like I didn't take the opportunity when we discussed it.
I'll go with Director Morris says. I think you can add some information to this.
Mr. Chair, after the last meeting when it was presented to council to use that property, the feedback from council was to wait and try and find some other locations. So what's going to happen in administration next year, the fire department is redoing their master plan for the next few years, and we're going to incorporate it as part of the master plan. So it's from a consultant, they're going to look at all these factors, they're going to give their strategic direction and opinion to administration and council with their recommendations of where that property will be.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, this should not be a political decision, it should be a decision made on facts, basically, by the department and its consultants. Leave it at that, thank you.
So, yeah, so they're gonna look at other locations and this one's still gonna be played, correct?
The Harrow Soccer
Complex, yeah. So this location and others will. So that brings, like, Council Bonnie got the point about the event going on, what happened with the fire. So we have a fire station on this one block from Main Street. We run our Essex Fun Fest parade. What do we do if there's a fire in trucks? We normally go that way. What do we do?
So the parade will be interrupted. We would have to get people on the street, fire staff would hold the traffic, and they would go through.
So the same would happen at the event place in Harrow on that day, if there's a station there and there's an event going on, same procedure would be right? Will there be a new procedure made with the fire now?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So anytime there's any sort of road closure in town, the fire department is notified, so they notify the firefighters on duty. So if possible, they try to avoid those routes to not interfere with the event. Not always the case, sometimes they do have to go through. We've been fortunate where we haven't had many situations where we had to do that, but they are notified in advance to try and find alternate routes.
I was thinking about those, like New York, where those stations are and the traffic there, and how do we get them from B. So I think it's always going to be more than likely going to be an issue trying to avoid all the variables, but that's an important decision where it's going to go. We know this, it needs to be fire station.
Or just to add to Director Moore said, our fire department in the past has done a great job in the events. They talk with firefighters on plans. Here they'll make sure center, Gordon Street's open. But even this Friday, there'll be a perfect example at the fire station too. There's a movie night with the public, right? So they'll have to have a plan in place in case of a fire. So those are things that are part of our regular meetings now. Secondary.
Yes, in addition to that, so everything goes through the search room. And when, you know, we was working with BIA and putting on the parades and then putting on the car shows after, it was always set up so that the cars stopped a couple of car lengths before Center Street and, you know, didn't begin again until after. We always made sure that that intersection, the plan was always in place. So if there is a fire, there's a break in the wall of whatever it is you're doing. And I think with the Arrow streetscape and things like that, or not the streetscape, the open streets, those things are set as ahead of time. It's one of the reasons we ask, and when it comes to the search room first, we apply to have that road closed. When it is closed, that plan is made. I think regardless of where the fire hall ends up, all those things have to happen this time. If we end up at the soccer complex, we need another driver. That may be one of the downsides. And now we're going to come out with a separate drive on the Roseboro so that we don't interfere with where people are coming on. You just have to have the duplication of services or redundancies that are there for emergencies. So I believe all of that will be taken into consideration in the location, depending, you know, where you live. You know, for our firefighters in Ward 1, and they got to make that Victoria Talbot corner at times to try to get in and out of this area. So all those considerations are important. And I believe that what Council Coleman said earlier is correct. That this, at the end of the day, is not going to be a political decision. It needs to be the right decision based on facts. How quickly you can answer the call, the best place for the best protection of Colchester, South and Maryland. I think that's really
Mr. Chair, one other thing that I forgot to point out is with the CERT approvals, we do require that the closed areas of the roadways are monitored by event staff. So if there was an emergency situation, then they're able to assist with that situation, move the barricades, let them through, kind of clear the way as much as possible. One other thing, going through Councilor or Deputy Mayor Bjorken's point, is any sort of design will obviously have architectural designs included. So if they're, hypothetically speaking, it was the Arrow soccer complex that was used and an additional driveway would be needed, then that would come out in the architectural stuff.
I just wanted to say that on the weekend there was a fire just 1 block away from me, and there was a garage fire. There was some damage done to the 3 structures, but our guys got out there fast enough that they controlled the fire. They went down the other houses. There was some damage, but nobody lost their home. Nobody was displaced. So first of all, awesome job to our guys for doing that. Second of all, they got out fast enough from where they're at right now. I can't wait for once the actual plan comes forward and the consultants are in, and get them to the best possible spot to respond to those calls. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that.
Councilman, that's an excellent point. I know when they did the fire master plan, and they were looking at Fire Station 2 at that time, exactly what they looked at, where were the fires happening and all that, plus they looked at potential growth, right? So that's why we're not there, say McGregor, but they knew that could be where you're going to get more dense population, so. We'll continue on. The next one was parking enforcement and security at Carver and overnight parking by Councilor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. So this keeps coming up. It's coming up over and over. You know, I've been, and people send me pictures of cars parked at night underneath signs that say no parking, enforcement of bylaw. And I'm wondering if there's something that we can't do. Is there somebody with the regulars that are, the people that live there don't know if those cars are people around boats or you know, it's kind of messy down there. I'm wondering if there's somebody we can clean it up a little bit better and enforce the cars that aren't supposed to be there to not be there.
I'll turn it again to Director Morrison.
Through Mr. Chair, right now I'm currently working on redoing our parks bylaw, which will be able to address this. Essentially what will take place is within the bylaw, add a section that posted areas may not permit overnight parking. And then if we post that on the facilities, what sort of consequences we can have for those actions. So I'll have to obviously work with our bylaw team to see what's proper wording, how the enforcement will take place, if it's, depending on what the situations are. So there's a little bit of work on our end that we have to deal with. But it is something that we're looking at. One thing to point out though is that most of our town facilities do not have limitations on overnight parking. There's only a few locations that do have that. So if it's regulated by bylaw, then it would be enforceable. So we just need to make sure that the proper channels are in place in the bylaws to be able to enforce those things.
Thank you. I know that in the past, we've had, people that have slips down at the harbor that are going to Peavey Island overnight, or they're going to Put in Bay for the weekend. And they'll come into a park, in the parking lot, use that parking area to leave their car while they go for the weekend. And for a lot of them, they always consider that came with getting their slip. If their slip, the parking space comes with the slip, and they're gone for 3 days. And there only used to be some communication between the harbor staff and people that are doing that. So just wondered, is there a process to that? Is that something that we do, or is that part of what you're going to be looking at?
Here, Mr. Chair, it's something that we're going to be looking at, finding out what the process will be for those things. Certain designated lots that are going to be allowed to have overnight parking, and those that aren't allowed to have overnight parking. As you know, the fishers are out there at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, so we want to make sure that they have parking available for them as well, and we don't just have people parking for days on end. That could affect our residents that do want to go and use the harbor for boating or fishing.
So the process for that is being able to park by permit. If they're going for 3 days, they do have a slip. We've got some kind of form they can hang in their mirror, and we know this is one of our renters. They're gone for 2 days. That's their car sit. So I just added that. We've had security down the beach now for a couple of years. We're fighting some issues. And I'm just wondering if it's time to have a discussion about, have we done that for long enough now that people are getting the message, and do we need to continue the expense of having beach security as opposed to just our harbor security that is there, watches over the boats and is there for security overnight. I think the word has gotten out, and there's changes in behavior as far as our beach and our park itself. So I'm just wondering if there's, just going to put that out there, maybe trying to start looking at, do we want to continue to bring in off-road positions like that?
So we will have time to talk about that seeing. I just want to make sure no other councils have comments on the parking first before we kind of talk about security.
Thank you, CEO Suite. I would like to see places in all wards where we have overnight parking for cycle tourism. For example, there's a sign, you scan it with your phone, you register your license plate, and you can cycle Essex for a day or two, leave your car there, go visit the winery, stay at a short-term rental or the Grove or Loma Vita or somewhere where the car is registered to the parking spot. Because I think we should be really marketing that cycle tourism. I'm getting, people, especially in Colchester, saying, like when the bike lane is down on the west side, like that is right there for us. And I've been working with the Share the Road group, and we don't have any designated spaces for cycle tourists. So, and it could be just as simple as I parked here, scan, register my car, and I'm good to go. And I pick 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights, something like that.
I can add to that. I know it's been in our capital budget and keeps being moved. I have permanent parking. I'm not sure if other individuals have gone to the larger cities now, but it's not so much coin anymore. It's through your iPhone, right? There's so many apps out there where you basically put your time in, you can cancel if you leave early, or you can do a longer duration. So think it's something we may want to look at. It'll help cycle tourism. I think it may help down the parking overnight, so that it's not tickets you're looking at. I know you're checking license plates, which is a lot easier, so.
Yes, good, so the residents are calling and complaining, or somebody wants a park and they can't park, I mean, if there's nothing identifiable in the car, they're calling and they're going to use the resources of having bylaw or police come in there to check, and only when you get there, go on an app and go, no, okay. I still think you need something. The parking down there is, for the fishermen, it's between 6 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. They should have a sticker delivery when it's blue that says 6 to 4. And after that time, if they're still in that spot, they're welcome to park there, just like we're welcome to park there. But really, at least we know during that time frame who's there. And I just see a lot of calls coming from residents. I mean, a lot of this is probably residents doing many ways. They're calling saying, I live right here and I see this car parked there for 3 days ago. What's going on? Now I have to call bylaw or police come there just to tell us that they did run an app and their license plate is good to go.
There's two challenges, go back to security, that I'm seeing where as administration, we have to clean up the bylaw to get wording in there, right, to have it when lots are overnight or not. Once we have that, then it can be enforceable. The second thing is to enforce it. So this will be future council in terms of their budget, is we're looking to be bringing forward additional bylaw, right? If we're gonna put these things, it's an issue. So I think there's those two components, is clean up our bylaw for the parks that we want to make sure they cannot permit overnight parking, and then make sure that it is enforceable. We'll go back to Deputy Mayor Bjorkman brought up about security, and just for the special purpose of our we're talking, we had security, two forms down there, parking and beach security, and you're talking about beach security.
So, not talking about both, and we've always had the harbor security. Okay, we added parking and beach.
Sorry, for my clarification, we still have to keep the harbor security.
Yes.
But we added parking enforcement, security, and there's another individual, just the beach. You're talking visitors.
Yes.
To Mr. Chair, so the number of complaints in recent years has significantly reduced, but there is still benefit to having the current security on site. There was an incident recently where there was a complaint about intoxication and urination happening at the complex, and security was able to intervene in that situation. So while we don't hear a large number of complaints anymore, there still is on the back end benefits to having them. Not to say that it's not possible to eliminate them, but there are still certainly the presence of an officer being on site certainly has its benefits.
Councilor Bond?
Thank you, CEO Sweet. I think it's imperative that we do keep it until we have extra hands in the bylaw department or extra, I've been told several times that, we don't have a lot of OPP officers on the weekend. So I think it's being proactive. I've been told this summer that, actually just sent videos of kids on the pirate ship, like shaking it back and forth. And one of the neighbors there told me that they take the books out of the little thing and light them on fire under the pirate ship. So I think an extra set of eyes and ears there is a good idea. Until we can replace it with something else, I don't think we should just abandon the beach security and the parking help down there.
Thank you. Good conversation. Next one we'll move on is Hydro One August meeting recap. That's from Councilor Bonnie.
Thank you, CEO Sweet. I guess we didn't really get a lot of data out of the Hydro One group that was here. I was kind of disappointed because I like data on flippers, and I know that they're looking at a regional approach, but we call them, Essex call them, not the region. And I think that in the term of council, I think all the mayors should get together and start lobbying and getting on the same page, because it's not just Essex that are having Hydro One flippers. It's Annisburg, it's LaSalle, it's Kingsville. Everybody's been reaching out to me saying it's not just here, it's everywhere. And also, just a question I think to our CEO is, have they agreed to come back, and what are our next steps as a council?
So I have just last week following up on council request for September 19th, for talking with one of their reps. So they went back after that meeting and looked at their stats, and they had very limited calls from residents on complaints on flippers and power outages. So a couple of things what they've done, from that, they are gonna be sending a letter out to all their customers, giving them, if you have a flicker, if you have a power outage, here's who you call either by phone, email, so they're doing that now. So based on that, and you're correct, Councilor Bonnie, there wasn't a lot of information, so the request is they want to come back and be useful for them and useful for council and our residents. They don't have any data metrics to present on the 19th. So they're hoping that can go now, and they'll come back in November, hopefully have more data and more of a plan. So that's the request. In addition to that, one of the takeaways was, if I have a claim, what do I do? So she did send me all the claim information, and what Marcus, or Andrew's Communications is currently doing. We're creating a utility page. So not only for hydro, water, different utilities, it's pretty well ready. We'll have that where people can go there. If you have a power outage, who you call? Could be EOK, could be Hydro One. If you have a damage claim, it'll be a link. So it's all links. It'll be a disclaimer that this is not through the town, right? But it'll have all that information that residents can use our website to obtain that. Director Gerard had a great suggestion too. Great quotes. We had nice. So everybody knows what the service area is, right? Something else is the entire town of Essex, for what's EOK, what is Hydro One. So that's the feedback I got from the reps from Hydro One, is one, the council is okay. They would rather get more data and metrics present later in November, so postpone that, and now the claim information will be available for residents beginning next week.
I love stats and numbers too. Some of the simple stuff that I think we can get from Ontario Hydro, or from Hydro One and from EOK is, even from Hydro One saying, we have the flickers. We know we had a flicker, but why was there a flicker? What was the cause of the flicker? And we had reports of 200 of them last month, and out of the 200, 70% of them are mechanical contact, 1% was traffic accident, whatever it is. Those are numbers that you report. Or maybe of the 200 calls, 9 of them were on Hydro One and 10 were on EOK. And it was on EOK because of this. You know, those are the numbers I think they should really have no problem putting together. They know why something happened, why there's a momentary outage or a long-term outage. Those are numbers I like to see.
She agreed, they know once they're contacted. So we're just asking if the residents contact them. They don't receive any. That's just the feedback I received. So before we move on, I saw some heads nod, but if I can maybe get, the council as a whole, it's good that move them from the next meeting until November, they have more data.
Great.
We will move on to the next one. Accessible audit of town facilities, trails, and sidewalks, brought forward by Councilor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. So where I was going with that was that the last few meetings we've had talks or heard about some here and there, bathroom splits that weren't up to date. And it was making me wonder how many of our buildings, how often do we go through and check and make sure that we're compliant in all of our buildings, they're all up to today's accessibility standards. If we do that at all, and if we don't, how can we get something in place to do that? So that's where I was going with that one.
So I think this may be three of our staff. I know Director Moore said in terms of facilities, I know you got sidewalks, so Director Gerard. In terms of code, what's requirement they can go to, and the charter there, but also that. So maybe I'll start with Director Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of facilities, a lot of our facilities are rented as leases through private groups. So oftentimes what happens is our lease agreements go out to them, and it's an as-is facility. So what they use is working for them. So if they have a situation that isn't working for them anymore, then they come to us, and at the next year's capital projects, we would include those pending council approval. We would look at having those projects incorporated with the agreement. So one thing, and I believe Mr. Carter will touch on this, is when a facility is built, they have to be built based on the standards at that time. So a lot of times a facility may not be up to the current standards, but it was obviously up to the standards that was provided at the time that it was built. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. When we do major renovations of facilities, we would have to bring it back up to that current code. In saying that, I am currently looking right now for, we don't have an inventory right now of all those potential upgrades that we could do in facilities. What I'm looking at doing is having a staff member train in the future on doing facility audits so that we can get that inventory and then start working with our master plan over development and see where we can use those along the way to try and bring up those accessibility standards in all of us.
I'll leave it with our chief building official next, just kind of talk about the code, AODA, when you need to be revoked or not.
Sure. Mr. Chair, as Director Morse indicated, all structures are judged under Section 3A, which is the accessibility of the date the permit was issued. So basically, everyone's house today needs code. In 2030, one of our homes will need code, because every house in 2030 not have a step one with you. Every house will have that way. That's 2030, not far from that. But your house won't have this right now. If you wish to, you can, but we, building department, unfortunately. And that's the case that we have today for accessibility throughout our city. If people are wishing to do it, they certainly can, but we cannot force it. We have an accessibility committee, they make recommendations, volunteer support. But again, you can't mandate unless Congress mandates that. Basically, it's straightforward.
If I could just add, either Director, Kevin, clarify for me, right now as a municipality, we have to make sure things are AODA standard if it's a major renovation or new build.
Right, once you break through that threshold of 50%, it's a new build. Anything less than that, it's still, unless you're making an addition, if it's renovation, it has to be 50%. If you're placing a 10% addition, that has to be existing.
So one other very good example for parts of facilities right now is the Lions Hall in Carroll. So it was previously very locked down, private rentals all the time, but now that we've taken more of the ownership, we are renting it out publicly now, so we're doing a lot of upgrades to that facility right now to make sure that those accessibility needs are made and met for when we're trying to rent that facility. So that's a really good example of one that we're putting extra attention on because it's being pointed to.
Director Gerard, I know you also mentioned about sidewalks.
If I could just ask him, but just back to building inspector. So just to be clear, so if there's a 10% new addition, that 10% has to be up to today's standard. The rest of the building doesn't have to be brought up because we put 10% new on. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. If you add, like, that was an example, 10%, if you add any new structure to pre-existing, non-compliant structure, just the new has to not be existing. But if you were to break through new construction 50%, that changes everything. Now, even the old becomes new. And again, that's with renovation. Renovation, you don't have to add anything, just renovate the existing. If you break the threshold 50%, everything in the house has to be in compliance with today's. Thank you.
Anything else on facilities before I go to Director Gerard? Okay, so I know your topic is also about sidewalks, so I figured Director Gerard can provide an update here as well.
Through the mayor, so essentially all infrastructure is grandfathered in. So it meets the standard of the day. Any new infrastructure that would have to go in would have to meet AODA standards. So for instance, maintaining a sidewalk in a good state of repair doesn't necessarily mean that we need to bring it up to today's standards. But anytime that something new would go in or we would replace an entire section of sidewalk, we would make it compliant with AODA standards, including grades, widths, high tile plates, approaches, all those things that come with that legislation. The same goes for all multi-use trails, things like that, with the municipality. But again, nothing that is replacing panels or things like that don't necessarily mean that you need to bring in addition to that, anytime we do a capital project, a substantial capital project that includes sidewalks, or for instance, the Harrow Streetscape or the Essex Streetscape, we do complete an accessibility audit internally as well as with our consultants, to try and make our downtown cores or projects as accessible as possible and barrier-free as possible. So we do include that in our procurement documents and require that of our consultants as well.
Any other comments, questions for council? Okay, we'll keep moving along. Next item was reserve. I apologize if this isn't exactly the easy thing. Reserve to bring infrastructure up to AODA standards.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is kind of like, so we know that we have spots now that aren't up to standard. There are old stuff that we haven't renovated yet or that we haven't, to use the bathroom that we had to fix there as an example, or our clients come out and do it. So when we bring that up to standard, we have to pull that money from someplace. With the Kinsman bathroom there, we had to find a spot. We don't want to make it accessible. I was wondering if there was any appetite to actually set up some kind of a reserve fund in our budgets that we have money ready at us. If a private group comes to Director Mark and says, hey, this space is great, except this bathroom isn't working for us, we have money available to fix it right away, knowing that we have to be accessible.
We'll go to the director first on that.
So typically those projects, as our Director of Human Services spoke earlier, are considered new upgrade. So at budget deliberations, what would happen is they would propose a priority list of projects. And we actually do have an accessibility line item in our contingency reserve. So administration at that point comes up with potential funding sources for those projects. It could be through that reserve, it could also be through taxation. But also, by March 31st of this year, we'll be proposing a reserve investment plan to make sure that those reserves will be replenished as well.
You've already won there.
No, it's a good suggestion because as it becomes, we have older facilities, and we need to look at it, right? It's always where the money going to come from, so it's just a planning exercise.
Just a point of interest for us, does anybody know, there's the AODA standards that are being walked in over time. Is there a date where, I don't know, with businesses, I believe it was 2027 or something, that all of these things have to be in place, regardless of if you had it before or not. Is there a date, does anybody know that we're approaching, where a lot of these standards have to be implemented?
No, but I'm going to maybe ask Director Morris or homework, is I know on the AODA site has those dates with for customer service, municipalities, private, built form, I know it was kind of trails and that coming up. So I think there's 5 categories with dates, so maybe if we can get that out, send us all a council. Next one is sidewalks on both sides of streets in new developments brought forward by Council Lee. Oh, ready to get back?
I didn't see it on the list. So.
That's your last one.
No, that's something that every time I hear it, I like it more and more. We were talking about trails, having access to trails. We were talking about, becoming more of an active community. I really like the idea of having sidewalks on both sides of subdivisions that are being built now. And I was just wondering how we go about putting that in. If there's appetite to actually say that from now on, when you build a subdivision in Essex, both sides of the street are being said.
We'll go to Director Chadwick first, if she can talk about the development standards manual, and maybe there's some logistic part of it that Director Gerard can pull up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That definitely is a collaborative effort for this response between Director Gardner, So first things first is that the town council has approved the development standards manual, which sets the, essentially the parameters for how to develop these types of big projects such as subdivisions. The town has adopted this development standards manual, requiring new subdivisions to have sidewalks on only one side of the street. So any amendment to that development standards manual would have to go through the motions that go through council direction as a whole. And certainly would require some consultation, I would assume, that especially our stakeholders, and of course, feasibility with design standards and the engineering review as well. Certainly something to consider from the developer's perspective as well as the walkability and benefits to having sidewalks on both sides. And then, of course, the width of the roads, this is where, and then we look into Redmond Road, and what that means for even impacts if we were to ask for sidewalks on both sides, what does that mean for the minimum width of a right of way, for example? I'm not sure where that's. So just to talk process, the DSM steps right now has mandated through that manual and
Yeah, through the mayor, I guess kind of build on what Director Chadwick is. I think that's a good point. I think that the developer community would be consulted. Would be essentially doubling the cost of sidewalk with any development. We did procure a consulting engineer as well to help prepare our development standards manual. So there could be some consulting costs I'm looking at, things like that, because it's true, we have limited right-of-way space anymore. It's getting worse and worse as more infrastructure requirements. Everyone wants, there's separation within a right-of-way. Everybody wants a meter. We have all of the town's infrastructure, telecommunications, hydro, gas, street lighting. It's very difficult to fit any more additional infrastructure into our right-of-ways now. In fact, if you look into the development standards that council approved just recently or within the year, we've actually pushed Union Gas out of the right-of-way into private easements because there was just no room left within our right-of-way to accommodate their guidelines. I'm not saying that it couldn't be done. Some other challenges are, that it's double the infrastructure for us as well, right? So we already, have pretty extensive needs for our own existing sidewalks. So when that time comes to replace those assets through MAP, you're looking at double the expenditure for life cycle reserve contribution from MAP for those sidewalks. In addition, we complete sidewalk inspections internally. So annually, our operations department actually walks every sidewalk within the municipality and identifies any deficiencies that would exist. Doubling the sidewalks in our urban centers could potentially have a major impact on operations as well, and the amount of effort it takes to do those inspections. But it's certainly something that can be done. It would just take some extensive research. With that being said, infrastructure services as well as development services have identified a couple of things that we might want to tweak within the development standards manual in 2023. So we could see a report coming in 2023 that might identify some slight changes. That could be something I considered at that time if this council's prerogative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to hear my fellow Ward 3 councillor supporting an idea that I've been floating for a few years now. But now that we're talking about it in more detail, I want to bring up two things, and that is I still support, of course, you have to think about cost. But one thing we can talk about the right of way and everything, the developers are going to complain it's going to add to the cost of basic home. And it will. I don't know how much that is. We have to check into it. Is it worthwhile pushing up the price of each block by 10,000 to have sidewalks on both sides? And I think it is. There's another solution, and that is that in a subdivision we don't have sidewalks on both sides of all the streets, just on both sides of the main streets. Versus the big Valente development going in here with 550 homes, there's about 10, 12 streets. But there should be double sidewalks at least on the big loop around in the middle. Maybe all the little side streets don't need to, but the main streets need to for sure. But we need to know how much that's gonna, I mean, housing's one of our biggest issues. We need to know how much are we gonna drive up the cost of housing by doing this. And, I still think it's worth it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So in our development standards manual, it does state that all collector roads within the municipality are required to have 2 sidewalks. And the option for municipality to require a multi-use trail in lieu of one of those sidewalks. So it could be 2 sidewalks or a sidewalk and multi-use trail down those collector roads. And that is something that we did in the one of these subdivision that you mentioned. Yeah, so I mean, that is something to consider in the multiple orders. It is something that I would encourage anybody to take a look at that manual. I know it's a very large document, but there's a lot of really great detail in there.
Councilor Goldman?
I would just sort of indulge on that same topic. I mean, there's some places where you really get these cul-de-sacs, you know, you just really looks, it really don't require the sidewalk at all. Major streets, obviously, the sidewalks on both sides, and then there's other streets that are some minor streets that I think should have them on one side. And again, it all comes down to cost. Not only for the developer, but for this valley. Because if you're building a sidewalk, you're going to double our replacement cost and maintenance on those over the years. Rather than having a sidewalk, they're able to see snow removal on the one that we've got from the municipality. You know, there's no issues. Just a thought. Thank you.
Yeah, through the mayor. I do want to point out that during reviews and approvals of new subdivisions and developments, we do handle each development on a case-by-case basis. We do look at using the development standard as the standard to make everything equitable across the development world in that sense. But we do handle everything on a case-by-case basis, so we know whether that sidewalks need, where it might be needed, and where it connects to as well. But I also wanted to remind council also that not every resident wants sidewalks on both sides of the road. I would remind council of the recent discussion in Townsview, we have challenges that pose. So putting sidewalks on both sides of the road could pose issues for future administration and council and approvals and what the residents of that subdivision would want.
Thank you, through you, CEO. I think that street parking is a discussion that we have to tie in with sidewalks, because if you have sidewalks on both sides of the road, you're likely going to have more street parking, because you can't park like this, because now you're blocking a sidewalk. So this car has to go out and park on the road. And I think that a lot of times, like I'm in my subdivision all the time with my girls on their bike, and the more cars that are parked on the street, it feels like we have to go in and out of cars, and cars are coming, cars are going, and so that's one of the cautionary tales I have. Sidewalks on both sides. We're probably going to have more street parking unless we have really big frontages, really long, deep frontages. I like accessible sidewalks, and I like active transportation, but all sidewalks are not created equal. In Parksview, the subdivision that's being developed on Erie Street, the one sidewalk that's being developed, the long active transportation trail, that's like a knock it out of the park one. I'd rather have one main, quarter sidewalk, and then the other ones not so much, because you're just cluttering the street really sometimes. And a lot of residents, like Director Jarvis, do not want sidewalks in front of their yard. So I'm glad we look at it site specific to say, okay, does this work here? Does it work there? How far are we away from the school? I think is also something that matters. The closer we are to the school, the more kids that are walking towards the school. I know Arthur Street in Harrow, my first term, I did a little survey because parents wanted a sidewalk, and all the parents wanted it that lived down here, but like 75% of the residents that lived on there didn't want
it. So I think in this chat it's about new developments, and I think the new developments, I think it's more important that when I'm buying a new lot in your development, then I'm aware there's gonna be 2 sidewalks that are gonna be there. If you don't make them aware, then, great, but if you're aware, then there should be no problem moving to a development or that 2 sidewalks. Existing developments, and you just pop in 2 sidewalks, that could be a problem. And as far as the parking part of it, 2 sidewalks won't necessarily, I mean, most subdivisions, where they have 1 sidewalk on one side or 2, parking usually rotates every month, so shouldn't be any added parking per se, just because we're adding a sidewalk. I think there's a place for 2 sidewalks on both sides, but, I think in the new development, like I say, I'm not opposed to, longer, everybody wears the getting sidewalks.
Yeah, through the mayor. So, in our development standards manual, we actually do specify that developers are to include that in their agreement of purchase and sale. Unfortunately, the town doesn't have anything to do with those purchase and sales. So there's no way for us to regulate that. But there is a requirement on developers to post a sign, which identifies the lot layout and where the sidewalk should be placed prior to the development of that piece of property. So there is opportunity within the town's control that we undertake to make sure that it's at least communicated in some means, whether it's pictorial or asking them to include it in their agreement of purchase and sale. Although we do make every effort that we can to try and communicate that ahead of time. We don't get to choose the residents that go in there, so all we can do is rely on our developers to communicate those things appropriately. We also do, our development standards manual also was designed in order to, with, I guess, parking in mind. And if we were going to talk about the 3 most contentious things I deal with in my career, we touched on 2 today, and this parking, sidewalks, and the 3rd is speeding. So, yeah, I'm sure that's somewhere on the list. But we do consider that, and like Councilor Aaron had mentioned, the parking we have adopted a practice of alternating the parking. Try and alleviate some of the concerns from both sides of the road, as well as able to maintain our roads for road maintenance and street sweeping. So that is all considered in the development standard.
Yes, I wanted to be clear. I was talking about new subdivisions only. None that are already being built, none that are already, existing. Just moving forward, brand new ones. Because I would agree that not every resident wants to have a sidewalk, in fact. And imagine only the half that we're forcing them to have a sidewalk in front of their house right now don't want those sidewalks in front of their house. We're only forcing half of them. To be fair, we should put them on both sides of the road. And then as far as parking goes, if we keep our kids on our sidewalks and our cars on the streets, then that's a safer thing. It's having our kids playing on our streets that might not be very safe. So I would make it even safer neighborhoods to be able to keep them on both sides of the road. On the sidewalks, I should say. So that's where I was going with that.
That's very quick question. In terms of development standards, I don't know if they mentioned how large it is, we've all seen the size of it. But on our website, I think we've had it where it's shortened, where you just click on the link to the section. That's where we want to get. So the residents can quickly see if they just want to talk about sidewalks or developers, right?
Not this time, so what we do have is a downloadable PDF. In the PDF, you can open up the bookmarks and scroll to those sections. We do have plans for usually free to have the section on our page, a little bit more user friendly for the developers, with contractors, with designers, engineers, that we will also a little bit more features on that page.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, what's involved in trying to get that change? Is it as simple as just asking a bylaw and just that in our official plan?
So we can manage the development standards manual?
Correct. To get 2 sidewalks on both sides.
So the development standards manual is not a legislative document, so we can amend it under whatever process we would like. We would highly recommend consultation with the public, with our stakeholders, not just developers, but even our utilities and partners such as Buchanan County. We would likely have a review internally. It would take several months. We've all seen it took 18 months to prepare a new TSM, And we use a routine and some of that, and as the recruiter indicated, they would be able to go to that, some assistance just to review. It's a step, some are like 6 months. Some happen.
So it's a time process. Time process.
I think it would ultimately depend also on how many or how much change you want to make. If you need substantial change, then it's significant public consultation. As opposed to small minor changes in wording that can be completed through council.
Just quickly, yeah, so we talk about the stakeholders on sidewalks on both sides of the road, talking to workers and all that, I mean, is there any municipalities, or neighboring municipalities that have that already, that you have to have through sidewalks? I'm sure they would have to talk to the same stakeholders. But we need to necessarily talk to someone that's already permitting in another municipality for getting that.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly look into our neighboring municipalities, and as Director indicated, it's a minimum standard. Looking at, whether it's a requirement, changing the development standards and then to inventory is a whole other scenario. I don't know offhand what municipalities.
Through the mayor, yes, there are other municipalities that require it on both sides. The challenging part is those municipalities don't have our residents and they don't necessarily have our developers, right? So that's why the public consultation needs to happen, is because it's not necessarily that those same developers in those communities, they may have lot land, knowing that, our development standard is one way and the municipalities is another. So to just go and change it just based on that, every municipality does it, may not be the most active way to do it. So require public consultation.
My guess would be property, I think that would be that now.
That's what it is, when you go that process.
Yes, it would actually just be a quick question to Gerard. It says that the vote may be making some tweaks to our development plan in 2023. At that time, if we want to look at doing this, how much extra is that going to add to the tweaks we already talked about?
Yeah, through the mayor, they're mostly wording things and things that we caught because it was a first draft. So as usual with the first draft, you might catch the spelling errors or some tweaks that you want to make that are minor in nature. Doing something like adding a sidewalk to both sides of the road is a substantial change to that.
Good conversation, so we'll keep going. Short-term rental enforcement, and that's brought forward by Councilor Bond.
Thank you, Chair. I need to declare conflict of interest. We're starting the new study to declare the fund.
Thank you, and CAO speak, I think that this one really, I think the enforcement discussion is going to happen when we just talk budget and talk about bringing in more tools for enforcement. Just a comment that I'm hearing is from the members of the public is how are we going to enforce the issues with the short-term rentals? But I think it's actually going to come out in the wash. So I'd much rather save more time unless other council members want to speak to it for speeding or even review the roads budget. Because we're done at 6, right?
So we will see that everybody's okay. We will go with our last topic of the night, which will be speeding in municipalities, traffic enforcement, brought forward by Councilor Bondi and Councilor Lady for the discuss.
Thank you. Through you, CAO. I think it's just we still don't have a solution on traffic enforcement and speeding. I'm not sure how much those cats are out, if they're able to get out, what information are we getting from them, what conversations are happening at the police service board, and is there a light at the end of the tunnel for all these speeding complaints that we're getting? That's basically all I have.
Well, the only thing to add to that would be that our next time we're looking at funding our police service, where we ask for a service agreement. Can we ask for more traffic enforcement and take away positions from someplace else, or find a way to fund that somehow? Would be my question on that. And then, yeah, our use of our new devices. we bought new devices yet, and then how it works.
So I'll answer your second question first, and Director Gerard will jump in. So we received them, just recently got trained on the black hat boxes. One has been used, and I believe Director Gerard has a report coming soon on one of the roads that was used. Next meeting, the 1st of October. I'll give you an idea what stats we can pull. I know through talking with my meetings with the OPP, other municipalities that have been using it, it's been a great resource. And their example is people go and go see the speed trailer. Right? Visually, I see that speed trailer there. Some see how fast it goes, some slow down. There's a whole variety of what people do. With these other boxes, people know they're there, they'll notice. Most people aren't even going to notice them. So we're going to get true data of when speeding's happening in terms of the speeds, slow, fast, time of the day. There's a lot of data metrics we can pull from those. So hopefully at that time, then we'd say, work with the OPP, get on blank road during this time, we enhance the enforcement. So that's where we are in the black hat boxes. I think they will be a benefit. We haven't had full use of them, just for the training when they came in and everything else. Another bonus for those, but they are solar. So we initially thought we'd have to change out a lot with batteries, but they won't, so that'll help us. In terms of traffic enforcement, adding in terms of what OPP's duties are, I may defer to Chair, because I know those conversations happened in the past in the Police Service Board, and what we've been told in the past, they only have so many officers to do all the policing. So just to have a dedicated person is a challenge. And that's where council looked at that in the past, but did not go through. Even the police thought, their opinion, not mine, that one person can only be so many places 5 days a week as opposed to 7. There may be other methods. I'm not sure what those are. That was they're not sure if you get the true value of just adding one officer. My thought is if we could meet with the police service board and make it a mandate through our municipality, then we want to see more traffic enforcement from all officers. And before I go, anything good?
Well, no, well, but, a dedicated officer may or may not have made, helped us experience some improvements, but I'm really excited that these black boxes were the way we went, and because in some of the municipalities, they have experienced, significant change. And I apologize, Councillor, or Director Gerard, for giggling at you, but all I could think of was, the triactor, the hat trick, he got all three. Sorry.
Councillor Garrett.
I feel like I say too, we invested in the black hats, and we still haven't got a report to see, but I think we know how they're gonna work, and I think, again, with the dedicated officer, they'll probably do some educational, write some tickets, but the driver patterns will only change. They'll see the vehicle, just like they see the speed trap line, and they'll slow down. I like the black hat because they're kind of hidden for the whole season, so you're gonna get a true indication of the traffic and the speeding on the roads.
I will add, and I'm sure Director Jordan wants to add anything. I know he is also looking at, people already know what to saw, kind of, instead of the trailers, you can now mount the same thing, but on posts and they're more permanent. And you can have different messages on it too. So I know his department's looking at those options because they were truly just affordable. So, I've seen it.
Just one more point on that, in that they may be more beneficial than an extra officer, is that in many conversations with Mr. Gerard and the OPP, often it's more about perception than anything, and so these boxes will provide facts as opposed to the community's perception of what's happening.
Just a comment, we contract with the OPP to supply field service at a certain standard. And that's what they give us to meet the contract obligation. Unfortunately, it's directly from the road, it's not directly from town hall. We can ask for areas that we see concern, and as time permits, they will do it. problem is we want a specific service, that's an add-on, and we're not going to pay extra for it. It was in last year's budget, and, the last minute, so that's as it is, but, again, if you want those stuff, extra services, that they don't supply in the regular thing, we want to pay extra. Just like going for any procedure you want it to be paid. Thank you.
Speeding is the number one complaint that I've got for the last 19 years. It's the most consistent from year to year. There's different topics that come up all through the years. Something that's wrong with town or something, a project that we're working on, do a lot of things like that. But one thing that's been consistent for the entire term of the economic council is speed. It's not just one spot, it's all across the whole town. When you go to the whole conference and you talk to people from other communities, they say the same thing. It's not just here, it's all across the county, it's all across the province. It's everywhere. And, maybe we need to push the government to say, hey, it says 80 kilometers an hour, you give a ticket at 80 kilometers an hour. Everybody knows you go 100 if it says 80. We need to be pushing for that. Local speed with it.
Just, so one of the things here is that there will be a time that we look at getting the transit offices, so there might be better ways. Did you ever get a report back from them on what the better ways might be to solve some of the speeding problems?
Just our conversations that are maybe in our office.
Okay. And then if we, so if we did like the idea of just a standalone traffic officer, but we kind of, keep touching on the basic of needing more enforcement, doesn't want to that. Can we just like hire an extra officer for more enforcement, not call a traffic officer? Is that something that we're service level?
So I know we went through the budget process last year.
Yeah.
It was an additional $190,000 to add that one position.
That would be an offset we can use for any position, or that just a standalone?
That's for traffic, standalone.
Okay, and if we just add, if we wanted one more constable in our area, it's the same price?
Yes,
Same
that's
price.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One police officer, $190,000, about 150 shifts a year. One speed camera, couple 100,000, 1,100 shifts a year. Speed camera.
No, I was just.
That actually wraps up tonight's committee of the whole. I think there was good discussion, got through a lot of topics, but at this point, I'll turn it over to our deputy clerk. Deputy clerk.
I'm retained, I apologize, sorry. Okay, so, sorry about that. So let the presiding officer of the committee of the whole now write a report to council as to any recommendations to council that were duly passed by the resolution of the committee of the whole. Yes. Mayor? Mayor? All in favor?
And now we ask for the adjourned by Deputy Mayor Director and Council Bowman. All in favor?